Now, our next speaker, to be fair, has had a phenomenal run. Adam Kay has spent the last 10 plus years building multiple SaaS sales teams. In particular, for the last 4 years, he took Paddle from Series B to Series D, was also responsible for leading the business when they acquired Profitwell for $200 million, and was responsible for growing ACV 10x and ARR 20x in those 4 years. There's a lot of kind of back channel chats that I have with people on LinkedIn, like we all do. That's where I appear. And there's consistently, a lot of kudos in Adam's direction. So I'm really grateful that he's going to be closing tonight's event. So since wrapping up that gig, he's now become CRO of a company called Fonoa. Should have tested that. Fonoa. Let's edit that. Adam's just joined a company called Fonoa as CRO, which is a global tax solution, automation platform and compliance solution that helps companies streamline the entire transaction. He's going to be talking about the revenue leadership between wartime and peacetime. So let's have a round of applause for Adam, our final speaker.
Should have told you beforehand, the name. Thank you. Really nice introduction. Really nice to be here as well. Great to meet everyone. As James said, my name's Adam. I have spent the last 4 years at Paddle, joining it post-Series B at around 4 million ARR, and leaving a couple of months ago as we crossed the 80 million ARR milestone. And as James said, several rounds of funding and a recent acquisition of Profitwell. Look, today, I wanted to talk a little bit about the context of wartime and peacetime revenue leadership. It's a topic that we're all absolutely and acutely aware affects our day jobs today. And it's allowed me a chance, especially over the last few months, to really reflect on my learnings, particularly over the last 4 years with the growth that Paddle have achieved and the experiences that I've been through, and what lessons we can think about. Caveat, I come at this with a vulnerable approach, which is, I don't know, right? And this, we're all learning, we're all experiencing things for the first time, right? For the last 15 years, we know we've been living in boom times in the SaaS world, right? A constant, continuous adoption of SaaS. We know that capital has been relatively easy to access, combined with kind of macroeconomic circumstances of effectively free money, low inflation. It's been great. And of course, today, we stand at the edge of a very, very different landscape that we're about to enter into. We are looking at ACVs being pressured downwards. We're looking at sales cycles lengthened. We're looking at investor and board memos coming down about preserving runway. And sadly, as we're hearing more and more, people in our sector being let go and businesses closing down. So what does this mean for me? What does this mean what do I have to transition from in terms of my behaviors, my attributes, my focus from the good times to what we're calling now the war times? So I think it's very, very useful to take a step back and go back to fundamentals. And I think the job of any revenue leader in an ambitious, fast-growing company is to build a repeatable, predictable, scalable engine. What does that actually mean? Well, it starts with knowing your addressable market. It starts with knowing your ICP, your leading and lagging metrics, your KPIs, and from there, developing a route to market that you can build a plan against and making sure you can execute against that plan. All right? This is the fundamentals, and that doesn't change in peacetime or in wartime. However, in wartime, we know the consequences of getting it wrong are much more severe. A missed or poorly planned quarter will mean, sadly, having to extend runway, cut heads, probably your own as well. Right? So what can I be doing? What lessons can I draw from peacetime to apply to wartime and make sure, no guarantees, that I'm giving myself the best chance of success? So for me, I start looking back at Paddle. And I look at that extraordinary growth, and I try and think about why we went through that growth. And I'm very, very thankful that, again, the last 15 years, this was the third journey of kind of sub 5 million to north of 50 million. So I've had a chance to kind of compare different approaches. But the first major factor, I believe, in Paddle's success, outside of an outstanding product, outstanding positioning, was the people, right? And Reed Hastings, Aaron Mayer, wrote a great book called No Rules Rules. I'd highly advise you read it, which is a story about the Netflix culture. And ultimately, what they do is they boil down the success of Netflix and the culture there to this obsession with identifying, attracting, retaining, and developing A-class talent. Okay? And, showing at the same time B and C-class talent at the door. Now, I appreciate this is quite a controversial point for some people, and it's obviously a lot easier said than done. But the cost of holding on to B and C-class talent isn't just a burden on your P&L, it has an impact on the top performers, on the A-class talent. It's toxic, right? And so I truly believe if you want to be an A-class company, you need to have A-class people on that ride with you. So how can I start thinking about what identifies A-class talent? And I don't think there's a silver bullet. I think it takes a lot of time, understanding, and Carly shared some great ideas about how you can sift through that without necessarily relying on a CV. But for me, there is one common denominator of what an A-class talent looks like, and that is a growth mindset. Now, this is different, slightly nuanced from being coachable. A growth mindset is somebody who has the awareness and the proactivity to make sure they're continuously leveling up. Right? Imagine a typically fast-growing business. Hopefully, many of us are working in these businesses today with high ambitions. Especially early stage, those businesses are changing, evolving, developing at 200 miles an hour, right? Every day looks different. Every day you've got new challenges. And the reality is, if the people on that train are not also moving at 200 miles an hour, that train will soon be out of sight. Okay, and it's a really important attribute I find for people to have, which is that self-awareness and that proactivity of always leveling up. Yes, they might be great today, but how are they making sure that they are going to be great in 2 years' time as this rocket ship takes off? So how does this impact me as a revenue leader? Okay, attracting and identifying this talent is a challenge, but once that talent's on board, my job is to foster a culture where learning, development, and leveling up is not a nice to have. It's an absolute prerequisite of the job of day-to-day. Coaching opportunities, budgets for learning and development, making sure people have got clear feedback loops on how they need to improve and areas that they can improve on, this is absolutely essential for me. Right? And I think that's one of the first lessons that I learned at Paddle, and making sure that we can drive those right people to the right roles and leveling up continuously. And of course, in wartime, this is even more costly if you don't get it wrong. If you get it wrong, sorry. In peacetime, you might have a bit of slack to get it wrong, but in wartime, you've got to nail that absolutely. So that's the first lesson that I learned from peacetime that I think, it's heightened in wartime. The second reason and the second factor that I think contributed mostly to Paddle's success is the concept of predictability. Again, our job as revenue leaders is to build a repeatable, predictable, scalable engine. And I'm not here to pitch Paddle. I don't work there anymore. But Paddle is effectively like a payments business in terms of the business model. It's a usage-based model. It takes a percentage of every transaction that goes through the business, which makes it innately very, very hard to predict. Fast-growing SaaS businesses are growing very, very quickly. How the hell do I know what they're going to perform over the next 12 months? So how can I plan my business against this? And again, we don't see this just in terms of startups. We see the kind of gold standard of software businesses who adopt usage-based models have a challenge with this. Your Snowflakes, your Twilios, predictability is hard. I said at the beginning that the last 15 years have been the golden era, have been boom times for SaaS. But I'm sure we were all in relatively senior positions in March 2020, right? The pandemic was here. We didn't know what it meant for our businesses. Everyone was a little bit nervous and unsure. And the message that we were getting from the board, from our investors, from our peers, was the same message we're getting today. Protect your runway. Make sure you've got enough in reserve to get through this, because uncertainty is here. So back at Paddle in March 2020, we were having the same thing. We didn't know what the impact of the pandemic was going to be on our business. In hindsight, and I feel guilty saying this, it was very, very good for Paddle, like many, many SaaS businesses. But at the time, we were uncertain, and we didn't have a huge raise recently behind us to make sure that we could weather the storm. So what did we do? How did we achieve this concept of predictability? And I think I look at kind of how I used to measure performance in my revenue organizations and how many still do today, and it's this focus on lagging indicators. What's the impact of the environment on my ACV? What's the impact of this environment on my win rate? Right? What are my conversion rates through funnel? But the problem is they're lagging indicators. By the time you've noticed change, you're already in problems, right? You're in the red. How can you get predictability as a leading indicator? I spent a lot of time thinking about this in March and April 2020. And what we did at Paddle was, I thought, quite cool, right? We looked to get predictability as high up the funnel as possible. And we created this stage early in this funnel called conversation capital C. And the way it worked was, myself, an AE or BDR, you're outreaching to a prospect, you get a response. Hopefully that response doesn't have a profanity or unsubscribe in it. Inevitably, I will reply back. And if I get a response back from the prospect, that lead moves into conversation status, right? So it's implying some level of intrigue, some level of interest, but certainly not a qualified opportunity yet. And having this metric so early on in the funnel gave us immense visibility into what our future pipeline might look like. In fact, we inferred so much data from it, it drove our behaviors. We found that 50% of leads that went into this conversation status converted into opportunity within 21 days. On day 21, that conversion rate dropped to 6%, right? It's a massive, massive drop. So of course, we learned what our future pipeline was looking like. If our conversation levels dropped, we knew that in 21 days, we're going to have a pipeline problem, right? But we also knew that we could drive the BDRs and the AEs to say, hey, this leads at day 14, 15, you've got 5-6 days to convert this, otherwise you might as well just disqualify it and focus on something else, because the chances of it converting to opportunity are very, very remote. So again, driving this behavior, achieving predictability in wartime is a requirement, I believe, more than anything, to heighten your chance of success during these times. So to conclude, yes, peacetime and wartime are very, very different environments for us to be operating in, but the core principles remain the same. Focus on great people and focus on building that predictability and repeatability, and hopefully we'll find a safe path through this. Thank you all very much for your time.